The following review is intended for entertainment purposes and targeted for adult fans of the series.
Welcome back to Explaining Hyperforce References with your host, the Orange Ranger. This show isn't getting good ratings. Hello there, heroes. I'm the Orange Ranger, and welcome to another comically long review. Last time, we learned that in the years 3006 and 2007, or perhaps maybe 2006, the book does say 1,000 years ago instead of 999 years ago, Time Force Pink Ranger Jen Scott and Time Force Red Ranger Wes Collins have been dating across history. She's advised to break off the relationship by Captain Logan so she can focus on becoming the very first Hyperforce Ranger, but she hesitates. But when their date is interrupted by the arrival of a mysterious black Time Force Ranger accusing Jen of destroying all the timelines, Jen finally gets the message and tells Wes that it's over. They investigate the Black Ranger in both of their timelines, but Jen is accused of killing Alex by her Ranger comrades, and Wes is attacked by the Black Ranger in the past, killing him and erasing the entire town of Silver Hills from history. Can Jen learn what's going on with the Black Ranger in time to go back and save Wes? And will love truly conquer all? Find out in the conclusion of Sins of the Future.
Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you can see all of our videos.
Yeah, and make sure you got your notifications set up by hitting that little bell icon so you get notified whenever we post any brand new videos. Right you.
What he said was that if you'd like to support the channel in any way financially, you can consider checking us out on Patreon or Ko-fi at Orange Ranger Videos.
Right you.
So this is a 10-page script, and now I have to add to it with a correction. My thanks to Alwendo Cheng for pointing this out to me. Last time I said that Nadira somehow summoned the Transwarp Megazord, which they rode to Time Force headquarters. I completely misinterpreted that scene, though in my defense, if I did, that means they didn't really write it clearly enough. Nadira says that she shares Jen's flair for the dramatic, yanking her through a portal to Time Force headquarters. They are looking up because the Transwarp Megazord spotted them.
I get it!
Moving right along,
The Black Ranger has learned her lesson, saying she won't leave until the job is done this time. Nadira confronts her, but she gets whipped aside. Black says that this only confirms that Jen is responsible for all she has lost. She attacks Jen, thinking to herself that she will get revenge for every memory Jen has stolen from her, good and bad. Jen blocks her attack and says if it's her she wants, to come after her one-on-one and not hurt anyone else. She seems to agree, losing her friggin' mind. She says she has tried to fix what Jen broke, that being the very reason she was given the Black Morpher. In a moment very reminiscent of Jen's speech to Rancic in the finale of the TV show, she says her mission is to take Jen out, and she is going to do it, even if that means going out with her. Incredibly random single splash page of the two falling out a window. To be clear, it's not really obvious that's what's going on until the next page. You can see the shattered glass, but there's not really a sound effect, and everything is so stylized, it's tough to tell what is going on.
What happened?
Jen tries to get her to stop, saying none of this makes sense. Tell me about it, Jen. But Black won't stop, so Jen shows her tendency in this story. Punch things until people shut up. Oh no, now we're also dealing with the Time Force White Ranger. No, Black has just gone negative for a frame for reasons we apparently don't need to know. I guess it's the arrival of a really big chronal skip. The Dragon Zord. This is actually really interesting because Silver Hills is established to be one of the few Power Ranger cities to not be in the state of California. It's in Washington state. Now, in the comics, the MMPR fight all over the world, which is the way it should be, by the way. But it's just interesting to think that at some point, the Dragon Zord was in Silver Hills. maybe hinting at something to come in the comics. Black starts getting on Jen for things we know she has done, being flippant with time, crossing history to go on dates. And Black is especially sore about that, costing Alex his life, seeing as Jen once said that she loved Alex. Black says that she realized fixing what Jen did isn't the issue. It's Jen herself that's the problem. Meanwhile, time is shattering around them, portals opening. Even Black seems disturbed by this as a castle appears that she says she remembers from her dreams. They then see a battle-scarred Wes laying nearby, and Jen realizes that they've been brought together. Time starts straight up skipping. We're talking about the echoes from that early episode of Star Trek TNG.
There appears to be 3 of us!
Jen removes her helmet and demands answers, saying she doesn't know what's going on. Black is incredulous at this, since she's responsible for everything. Jen is tired of the accusations and demands answers again, but Black tackles her. Jen manages to wrestle her helmet off. The Black Ranger's identity finally revealed? Is it Katie? Is it Nadira? Is it Scorpina messing with things from the Hyperforce timeline?
Suspense!
Well, it's a blonde. Yeah, it's absolutely no one we know. This is a brand new character. Jen starts stammering that she looks like someone, and we see her flash back to another time. She's in La La Land, and someone calls for her to pay attention, letting us know her name is Saira. I think that's how you pronounce that. That's what I'm going to go with. Saira says she's there with her brother, and we see Alex. Yes, this is Saira Drake, Alex's younger sister. He smacks her in the head with a ball, saying he's going to get her as ready as he can to take the Time Force entrance exam. Back when we loved each other. Okay, getting some Quicksilver Scarlet Witch vibes here. When I could trust my memories. She witnessed Rancic killing Alex because of course she did. She was mad at everyone at first, but then realized it was solely Jen that was responsible. She doesn't explain exactly how, but I guess because Jen led the team that let Rancic escape, leading him to come take the cryo prison, leading Alex to come defend it, and then to die. Now, in a normal world, this would just be months of therapy, but Time Force isn't a normal world. Alex was brought back to life due to changes in the timeline, something that fans of Time Force have always suspected, and at least this book makes canon if only to itself. And suddenly Saira had 2 sets of memories. It basically drove her insane until she was given the Time Force Black powers. Since then, she's been in a loop of going back in time and making changes to prevent it, and every time the same thing happens. Alex goes back to the cryo prison to protect Jen, Rancic kills him, the Rangers go back in time and be the Rangers, Alex gets revived, and her mind breaks that much more. Jen apologizes, but even that doesn't help since apparently Jen always apologizes. And another great thing canonized by the comics, the obvious change in Alex's personality after his revival, another thing that Saira is powerless to prevent. Saira keeps insisting that her only option is to kill Jen, but now that Jen knows who she is, there's forgiveness. It's not really stated, but I'd imagine that the two would know each other from Alex's time courting Jen. Jen says she recognizes Alex's fighting style in Saira, and she says that the original Alex, which you could say in fact always dies, would be proud of her. She extends a hand to her. And of course, this works. Saira can't believe Jen would forgive her and is further confused about the cause of all this if it's not Jen. Jen's pretty sure Saira's morpher is to blame. Nadira suddenly pops back up, asking to take a look at it. Being from the future, she's seen a thing or two that they haven't. And a little green bird may have told her about some stuff that would be useful. Welcome back to Explaining Hyperforce References with your host, the Orange Ranger. If you are a Lucas Nadira shipper, you may want to cover your ears for this part, but on Hyperforce, that relationship was not destined to last. Nadira ends up marrying Joe Shi, at first the Time Force Silver Ranger, but later on the Green Hyperforce Ranger. Also, we see a little picture of him on her desk in the lab at one point. Joe Shi was played on Hyperforce by Yoshi Sudarso, and was the older brother of Hyperforce Red Ranger Marv Shi, who was played by Yoshi's younger brother, Peter Sudarso. Indeed, Nadira recognizes a very important detail. The black chronomorpher was absolutely made by Dr. Louis Ferrix. In a flashback, we see Dr. Ferrix building his Frax body. Wasn't he dying at the time? But then suddenly he's talking to Time Force. He's built two morphers that look like the chronomorpher and the quantum controller, but it's actually the morpher and a miniature transwarp drive. He's theorizing that if they could be combined, you'd have a ranger that could easily go back in time, as long as they weren't hurt or killed by the initial warp. Logan tells him he worries too much. But after Ferrix says he's built his own test subjects and that this will save people who will go on to have families of their own, Logan snaps on him, saying it's exactly the opposite, a form of chronal genocide. He demands the morphers, I thought only one of them was a morpher, be destroyed, and says they will find a way to protect time that doesn't involve altering time.
What are you talking about?
This scene made no sense at all. Is there one morpher or two morphers? Logan starts out all callous, getting on Dr. Ferrix for worrying about a time-traveling ranger getting hurt by the trip, but then snaps around and says you can't save time by changing time? I have no idea when this scene is supposed to take place, clearly before the events of Time Force because Dr. Ferrix is alive. I don't know, I just didn't get this part. Anyway, I'm going to be changing pages here, so I'll just add in that Dr. Ferrix supposedly destroyed the morphers, and Jen never realized that Frax was Dr. Ferrix. Saira declares that whoever it is that is screwing with time is her enemy, and now she and Jen are friends and allies. She asks Nadira if she knows where Frax's lab is, but Captain Logan steps in from the shadows and says she does not. He claims that Jen destroyed Time Force headquarters and the Time Force Rangers, so of course he came after her. Clearly there's another timeline going on here, so Jen asks what happened after Logan offered her Hyperforce. He says that Jen went back in time and killed Wes, whom Logan interestingly keeps referring to formally as Wesley, wiping out his lineage and thus erasing Alex. Logan says they recovered records from Saira's timeline, so he knows she saw it happen. Saira can't trust her own memories and says that every time Alex dies, she ends up here. Everyone else seems to realize that they're in kind of a weird place now, and Logan asks about it. She only knows that it's some kind of outpost that felt familiar despite her not remembering it. Logan says that means this is the black site and knowledge of it is forbidden. He tries to arrest everyone there, but Nadira shuts him up and asks Alpha 55 to call her daddy. Welcome back to Explaining Hyperforce References with your host, the Orange Ranger. The time ship that was the Hyperforce Ranger's base of operations came with its very own Alpha unit, Alpha 55. He is the 55th Alpha unit. I just realized that probably didn't merit all that much explanation.
Moving right along,
Alpha was worried about interrupting Director Rancic, and I'm going to skip doing a fourth Explaining Hyperforce References segment, and just tell you that on Hyperforce, Rancic is the director of the Office of Human Mutant Relations. I love how to the point Nadira is despite none of this making sense. Ran into a bit of a snag here in this other timeline, wondering if you could pull up the data on Dr. Louis Ferrix to clear up a few things. He asks if she's asking him to break protocol. He's not Time Force either. Whose protocol are they breaking? But of course, she's his sweetie little princess, and he agrees. Nadira says basically they don't know what's going on. Rancic is your older father who still doesn't understand how you're able to get the internet on your phone without a cord plugged into it, so she tells him to do a search and slowly read what the computer says. He doesn't want to drag up the memories of Frix, but Nadira explains about the morpher. The memories are still unpleasant, so Jen swallows hard, calls him Director Rancic, and explains that Time Force is wrapped up in this somehow, calling this place the Black Site, and that she saw a version of it with cyclobots everywhere and totally destroyed. Rancic explains that the Black Site is not the place's name, that's just its Time Force classification. It's called Outpost 1. Sound familiar? I bet it doesn't, because it didn't to me at first, but the words Outpost 1 have a very important distinction in Power Rangers comic history. Those are the first two words of the Shattered Grid event. The Time Force Rangers were fighting Lord Draken at Outpost 1. Tying the rest of this together, Outpost 1 is also the castle that Saira had dreams about. Rancic says all directors are told about Outpost 1 and how it's not supposed to exist. I think someone got confused here specifically about Rancic. I think someone told them about Director Rancic, and they figured that Rancic had gone on to become the head of Time Force or something. That would explain his line about all directors being briefed about a Time Force base like Outpost 1, and Nadira acting under him under Time Force protocol and regulations. Once again, Rancic is the director of the Government Office of Human Mutant Relations.
You're wrong! You're wrong! You're wrong!
This place ties into the very history of Time Force. They needed a massive power source for time travel. Dr. Ferrix developed one, but it was dangerous, so Time Force needed a place outside of the timeline to test it, not to mention that it would be safer for their power source to literally exist outside of time. The ladies get in the car, so to speak, a Time Force Eagle, to break on through to the other side. As Rancic directly says, the Eagle can get them there, but it will be destroyed in the doing. They're basically driving through the galactic barrier trying to find Shakari here.
What does God need with a starship?
And then they leave. Big spread with a smaller panel.
That was a great scene.
So here's the GPS directions to Outpost 1. Step 1, enter the time stream. Step 2, drive really, really fast.
Let's punch it.
The Eagle crashes at the Emerald City that is Outpost 1. The ship is indeed destroyed, but they made it. Jen says they're one step closer. Nadira starts to help Jen up, but then gets socked in the jaw by these things? They call themselves Time Ravaged. The girls run towards the outpost, Nadira screaming open sesame type stuff at the door. Jen thinks it's not working, but apparently the stuff she screamed is the password, or someone just opened the door, and they head inside. A robotic voice welcomes them to Outpost 1, and a video starts playing. Dr. Ferrix describes an experiment to try and help people withstand the mental strain of time travel. He encased a young man from Eltar in cyclobot armor. He calls the man Z. Just to clarify, it's not exactly clear whether or not this is intended to actually be Zordon and an attempt to explain his time warp thing, or just someone else. I think it's a coincidence. Remember, everyone from Eltar has a name that starts with Z.
Begin Operation Overdrive!
That was not funny.
The young man seems to die. Ferrix notes that the morphing grid reacted wildly to what just happened, and thanks Z for his sacrifice. Nadira realizes what's going on. That experiment caused the skips, as Ferrix tried to manipulate the morphing grid. The robotic voice agrees, saying it must be fixed. Time must be fixed. Nadira wonders how Time Force would allow this, and the voice says they were his redeeming method for the mutants. The Ravaged attack, and Saira powers back up, saying they're nothing her midnight sword can't handle. I really do wish it was just a whip. Apparently it's some kind of a sword with a motion trail. Nadira pulls Jen, who isn't helping for some reason, into a side room. Saira immediately follows, I guess. She just swung once and then ran after them. Nadira finds a data pad that says Outpost 1 was shut down due to some terrible experiments, with all evidence destroyed. Saira says she can just go back in time and get the evidence, but Nadira finds a bigger bombshell. One of the experiments created Venomark. Nadira gives an incredible summary of the Venomark storyline from Time Force, a monster that mutated Rancic with its bite. Ferrix always worked to make good for that mistake, but eventually Rancic killed Ferrix, who became Frax, and worked to get revenge from within. Jen chides Nadira that she didn't really mention that Time Force were the ones that wrapped things up all neat and tidy, and she was a criminal conspirator for it all. She basically brushes this off by saying trying to change the past can be disastrous. Nadira declares that she has enough information to return to Hyperforce, so I guess she is working for Hyperforce. She was never on Hyperforce itself. Trust the guy that reviewed every session. She says she's not a good enough fighter to deal with whatever's inside the Outpost, but she will let them in and make sure that nothing is following them. Saira tries to apologize to Jen, saying the time changes warped her grief into anger at her. Jen tells her not to apologize for her grief, and we put the emotional stuff right back in the box. Saira starts to say she's remembering more from her dream, but something activates. The source of the robotic voice, saying they have to fix the dream.
I dreamed a dream in time gone by.
Jen somehow recognizes that this is, I guess, at least the voice of Dr. Ferrix. He says Ferrix is gone and he was left behind as a copy, a second copy, to do twice the work. So is this Frax? No, this is Frix. Frix is 100% cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, not even able to distinguish between himself and Dr. Ferrix. Frix has been trying to basically cut and paste the timeline into a version where Venomark is never created, saving countless lives, including his own. Jen, I think it's a woman with dark lips, but up above, Jen is wearing red lipstick, and down below, Saira is also wearing red lipstick, so who knows who this actually is. But Saira talks next, so I'm guessing Jen talks first anyway, says that is temporal genocide. Mutants can be cured, but instead, Frix is trying to prevent them from existing, and that would erase multiple timelines.
What are you talking about?
Listen, at this point, the story's gone absolutely around the bend, and it's standing over there in the corner, folding its arms, and just refusing to make any logical sense. But something Jen said reminded me of something. According to this story, Dr. Ferrix created Venomark, and Venomark created the mutant Rancic. Rancic was born a mutant. The show says that he was born from the runoff from genetic modification labs. Venomark just gave him the skin-warping disease that he had to take medicine for, but Rancic was already a mutant before he met Venomark. That's what makes this really confusing. Jen says that by erasing Venomark, Frix would erase a bunch of mutants from history. That's not necessarily the case. Those people would very likely still be born. Just depending on whether or not Venomark can actually mutate people, they would either not have the skin warping disease, or they would just not be mutants. But that brings up another thought. Maybe Jen is talking more about the timelines that would be destroyed if history was changed, because some of these mutants didn't go on to do things that they would have done. Rancic is a great example of that. If Venomark is removed from history, Rancic is still a mutant, but maybe not so bitter about things. And if erasing Venomark means that Rancic isn't a mutant at all for whatever reason, he probably doesn't go on to become the director of the Office of Human Mutant Relations. And then that whole storyline in Hyperforce with him never happens.
All right, let's get started before my headache gets any worse.
Saira realizes Frix is responsible and attacks. Jen warns her to stop since he's directly connected to Outpost 1's mainframe, but it's too late as he grabs her throat, declaring he's connected directly to the Transwarp mainframe. Frix knows the perfect way to stop Saira, sending her to Prehistoria, a totally undeveloped world with no technology. He activates the other morpher, I guess. Jen guesses this, but we don't really see it, and tosses her into a time portal. Oh, ho, ho, ho. Jen is pissed now. And the story basically gives us the moral of the day. You see, everything in this story, Jen's relationship with Wes, Saira's grief over Alex, and Frix trying to correct the mistakes of Dr. Ferrix, all revolve around not being able to accept that things are over and done with in the past and moving on. The past should be kept safe in the past. Jen punches Frix once and he shuts down.
That was easy.
He uploads some data, but it's basically just his data spirit, leaving his body, saying he just wanted to fix the past. Jen realizes something though. Nothing has changed at Outpost 1, so the problem hasn't been solved yet. She sees the Black Chronomorpher and realizes they've created a paradox. Time dictates that Saira gets the Black Chronomorpher and attacks and etc, etc. But now the Chronomorpher exists outside of time. So, and trust me, I get that this is really confusing. If it's outside of time, it can never be given to Saira to begin with. So that's a temporal paradox. All of this really is on Jen. She has to go give the morpher to a young Saira to set all the events that just happened in motion.
Okay, I guess that makes sense.
As Jen goes back in time to give the morpher to Saira, she realizes that Saira was right. Jen is the reason she became the Black Ranger. She gives her the morpher, telling her about it and how it will become necessary to save all of time in the future. Terrible things will happen to her, and she's going to need to use it, but she can never harm an innocent with it, and must stay full of love and let the past go. As Jen leaves, Alex gets a call from Jen. That's a time travel statement for you. That Rancic is escaping with dangerous mutants and they need him there. Even Jen is frustrated. As she returns to Outpost 1, she sees it changing around her, and she wonders if she's even fixed things. I really hate time travel. The base turns into a more clean, sci-fi looking outpost, and Jen hears a door open. It's Saira. An older Saira. Jen asks basically 1,000 questions at once. This Saira is a bit older than Jen. It's been decades for her. They won because Saira remembered what Jen told her. She grieved her brother, moved on, and joined Time Force. Saira held on to the Black Chronomorpher and says Jen defeated Frix. Saira was just the last piece of the puzzle. Jen asks what they're doing there then, and Saira says they can now finally end this. She's been using the morpher for years, unrestrained, but the device is dangerous and she is getting old. It cannot fall into evil hands, so she gives it to Jen, who destroys it. The two smile at each other. Saira then points out, if you got together a couple of color-coordinated friends, Outpost 1 could make a pretty nice little base of operations. She leaves, saying she has a life to go live. Sometime later, in the past, or in the future... Hot Ranger time, apparently. Yowza! It's Wes, who is alive, by the way, and Jen's anniversary, and he gives her flowers. She welcomes him to Outpost 1 with wine and cupcakes. By the by, I realized later that in the clock tower before, that was wine, not champagne. It's a different bottle. Wes realizes Jen even retrieved the table from the clock tower, and considering that was destroyed by the Black Ranger, I think someone else has been jumping around the time stream. Jen says she's never half-assed anything in her entire life, and she wasn't going to start with their very first completely legit and totally authorized date. And I guess this is where being honest with Wes, even if he wouldn't remember, comes into play. Jen says Wes doesn't remember the other timelines, and admits she was going to break it off with him. He asks if that's still happening. This is a little stretched as we get an entire page of Jen saying, no, we're not. At least not yet. Alpha 55 walks over, now in the proper gold and black color scheme Hyperforce described. Earlier on when we saw him, he looked more like Alpha 5. He's acting as the waiter, bringing them their orders. It sounds like Jen is a vegetarian, getting a plant burger with zucchini fries. Wes basically got spaghetti with meat sauce and garlic bread. Wes asks how they're allowed to do this, since they have rules about bringing people to the future, which explains why Wes can't just move to 3006. Jen says, it's not up to them. Outpost 1 isn't the future. It's not any time or any place. It exists outside of reality, which makes it the perfect place for their dates and for the Power Rangers to hang out. Any Power Rangers from any reality or timeline. This is a place where they can be 100% safe. Wes still doesn't understand, but this kind of reminds me of, like, just to pick one example, the Christian concept of the Trinity. It's something that transcends logic, but it's not meant to be understood. What matters is that it's right now, and they are together. I have an ouchie in my thinky thing. Time Force Sins of the Future is a really strong story that is way too complicated for its own good. Like I said, the three-way story revolving around the general moral of not clinging to the past was pretty clever, and I like how we do see it from all three angles. Frix is what happens when you cling to the past no matter what. Jen very quickly lets go of the past and gets a happy ending from that, even though that's kind of a cheating conceit because her happy ending still involves not letting go of the past. And Saira is the in-between, at first embittered by clinging to the past, but then gaining happiness by letting it go.
Let it go, let it go.
Listen, time travel is going to be complicated to write. That cutaway gag I use of Captain Janeway,
All right, let's get started before my headache gets any worse.
she's talking about time travel. So complaining that a time travel story is complicated is kind of a moot point. What I can complain about are things like using have when you should have used has, telling Jen to unmorph when she wasn't morphed in the first place, and Alpha 55 being the wrong colors the first time he shows up. I can also complain about things like Circuit only having one line and that line being terrible, the other Time Force Rangers vanishing from the second half of the plot, and Eric not morphing into the Quantum Ranger at all. You might remember that when I came into this story, I was concerned. How would Boom treat my beloved Time Force Rangers? I will say that I love how headstrong and determined and powerful Jen is in this, and in fact, the story focuses on 3 powerful, complex women, so that's a nice touch. But overall, I feel the story just tried too hard to be complicated time travel science fiction, and being honest, I don't really feel like the writers were familiar with Time Force or Hyperforce. Boom! Give us a comic novelization of Hyperforce at the very least. That's what this story made me want. This story was pretty interesting at least, but the best way I can put it is this. I have now read this story twice, and I can say with 100% sincerity that I have absolutely no desire to ever read it again. Power Rangers Time Force Sins of the Future gets a 2.5 out of 5. Next time on a Comically Long review, it'll be December, and we'll be back to 1 with comic releases. Mighty Morphin and Ultraman are once again coming out on the same day. This month I did Mighty Morphin first, so how about this time we let the big guy go first? He hasn't actually gotten big yet, but hey, that's just another reason to let him go first, right? Shin just watched this mysterious doctor shoot his friend right in the face, so what's gonna happen next? Find out as I review The Rise of Ultraman, issue number 4. And that is going to do it for another Comically Long review. Thank you, heroes, so much, as always, for watching. Now that this video is done, you can let me know in the comments below what you thought of Power Rangers Sins of the Future, as well as my review of it. Did you think the story was too dense and complicated, shifty with the details, and in at least one case, the grammar? Or did you find enough in this that you liked that it was just another aspect of the wonder that is Time Force? Let me know about all that down in the comments below, and while you're down there, make sure you smack that thumbs up button to let me know that you enjoyed this video. Heroes, I hope you had a wonderful and safe Thanksgiving, and until next time, may the power protect you. Accusing Jen of destroying timelines and all the other stuff. Navira. Gosh, dang it. Should have known that was going to happen. Silver Hills is established to be one of the few Power Ranger cities, telling him to come to the Since then, I don't get to read the script apparently. But later on, the Hyperforce Green Ranger. Sorry. But on Hyperforce, but on Relationship, that Hyperforce wasn't destined to last. But after Logan says, says they will find a way to protect time that doesn't involve altering time. God dang it. And says that this will help, saying it's exactly the opposite, a form of you can't change time by saving time. Logan starts out all callous. Saira declares that whoever is screwing... Saira declares that whoever that is... Oh my gosh. Director of the Office of Human-Mutant Relations. Ferrix notes that the morphing grid reacting... Jen is a Power Ranger. And Venomark created the mutant Ransik. But that wouldn't necessarily happen. Those people would very likely... The show says that he was created from the runoff from genetic modification labs. Oh my gosh. Ransik is either... Okay. If Venomark is destroyed, Ransik is still a mutant. It's not destroyed. Ransik is escaping with dangerous mutants and they need her there. Wow. She leaves saying she has a life to go live. I am doing that take again. You get together a couple of Outpost 1 could make a pretty nice base of operations. I think I have an not I think. Oh, I did say that, but Alpha 55 being the wrong color the first time he shows up. Once again, Power Rangers and Ultraman are coming out. Is it Power Ranger? It's Mighty Morphin. So how about this time we let Ultraman, the big guy... Wow, I'm good at this.